Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashti Capellos back in Ottawa on this Monday. Tonight, Pierre Poilievre sails through the biggest test of his leadership so far.
The best is yet to come.
Thank you very much.
Poilievre garners more than 87% support in a leadership vote at his party's annual convention, which means he'll likely take the Conservatives into the next election. We'll go one-on-one with the party's campaign manager, Steve Outhouse, on what Poilievre's resounding leadership review win means and what might lie ahead for the party in this moment. Then, on Parliament Hill, new year, new vibes.
We want to see this debated in the House today.
I'd like to believe it, but maybe I've been here too long.
MPs have unanimously approved a Conservative motion to fast-track the government's GST rebate boost legislation through the House of Commons by Wednesday. We're going to break down the politics behind that with our front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie will all be here together coming up. Plus, two prime ministers sit down in our nation's capital.
Now, some people look at Canada and would like to take it over from us. But we stand on guard, don't worry.
There were long-run threats to the North were actually quite serious, I think. I think I've been borne out in that regard. I didn't anticipate them being our southern neighbor.
Former Prime Ministers Stephen Harper and Jean Chrétien weigh in on Canada's place in the world. They've just wrapped up their fireside chat, reflecting on 20 years since Harper became Prime Minister. Our Mike Couture was there for that conversation, and we'll go to him live on location for the details a little bit later on in the show. First, though, we're going to start tonight with a resounding result for Pierre Poilievre in his leadership review.
The unsung heroes who built and protect this country, who have it infinitely harder than I do, they never give up, so I have no right to give up.
The Conservative leader delivered a high-stakes Friday night speech at his party's national convention in Calgary to a packed room of more than 2,500 delegates. It was a rousing, nearly 50-minute campaign-style speech filled with familiar attacks on Liberal policies, standing ovations, and chants of Pierre. The results? Poilievre solidified his place as party leader as an overwhelming majority. 87.4% of those in attendance voted in favor of him staying. It's a figure higher than what Stephen Harper achieved at his own leadership review back in 2005, where he got 84.6% of the vote. With me now to talk about that and what's next is the man who will lead the next federal Conservative campaign, Steve Outhouse. Hi, Mr. Outhouse. Pleasure to see you in Ottawa, outside of Calgary.
It's good to be back, I guess. Miss the Chinook.
Little colder. Yeah, thank you very much for making the time. I actually just want to start off on something that the Conservatives delivered into our inbox, which is that Mr. Poilievre is going to sit down for a meeting with the Prime Minister on the heels of the letter a few weeks ago that he wrote about interest in collaborating on stuff that, I guess, involves a shared agenda and that would address the crisis on a number of different fronts. What is the impetus behind the Conservatives asking for that meeting?
Yeah, well, I think our leader all along has said he wants to get results. He wants to help the government move from rhetoric to results, is the term he used. I mean, ultimately, what we've been talking about all along, and sometimes get chastised for talking about it too much, is that we want to help create legislation or laws or changes to policies that help Canadians with affordability, housing, fighting crime, things like that. And so I do think there are some shared items of interest that are on the government's agenda right now. Some of them we would like to go further as Conservatives, but things like you saw today, the unanimous consent to move things forward with the HST, we would say that we could go further, but for today, let's get things done. Let's get things done for Canadians.
Does that, I know you say that's been part of the rhetoric for a while, but does it signify from your perspective, is there a strategy behind putting more emphasis on it now?
Yeah, I think everyone acknowledges it's a very serious time for Canada. There's a lot of challenges that are being faced, both domestically and internationally. And so, for this domestic agenda that's there, let's get it done and let's get it, through Parliament and let's, move the debate. If there are things that we agree upon, let's just get progress made and get these things in place for Canadians.
So that number, 87.4%, does it make your job easier? And if so, how?
Well, I mean, my job is not easy, so let's just start with that. But it does give clarity. There's a lot of support, obviously, for the leader, and to see that result was very gratifying. I didn't make any predictions beforehand. I just said, we wanted to see a strong result, and I believe that's what we've seen. And we've seen it, perhaps, stronger than some might have, suspected or speculated it might be. And very, very pleased being there on the ground. The mood was very, very good amongst delegates, and I think the vote reflected that. So to have that clarity, for my job, now I can go ahead and start, planning even more for this election for whenever it does happen.
Were you surprised at how high the number was?
So I'm naturally a pessimist, so I don't know if it's surprised or just, I mean, I was once I got there on the ground and started to talk to delegates and talk to people, and I had the chance to talk to a lot of people there in Calgary, you could see the support for the leader was very high, but it was very nice to see the results. So I don't know, I've been in politics long enough to be kind of numb to surprise or what have you, but it was very gratifying to see.
So I would never want to take away from that high level of support, but I spoke
great.
to, I
hear a but.
I say that against the backdrop of asking about the other 12.6%, because they are members of the party. They're obviously not a huge portion of the party that was there, but I did end up speaking to a lot of them who stopped me, even in the airport, for example, who felt kind of isolated in a way from the outcome of this. And I wonder what your party's message or your campaign's message will be to them.
Yeah, and that's fair. Look, we are a party that is, that really embraces the grassroots. We try to do that as best we can. And so I think it's fair that there's people who are going to have different views, and they get a chance to express that through a leadership a vote or a leadership process like they just did. And it was an overwhelming level of support, as you said. But it's fair, I mean, that for people to always want us to do better, they want to see us win the next election, and that's exactly what I would tell them, is that we're focused on that, and we're going to look at how to take that percentage and that support we got. We got historic support in the last election, as you know, but it wasn't enough to get over the finish line, and so now we need to build on that. And if they have some concerns and things like that, I'm always open to hearing from them and looking for ways that we can continue to build and do things better and to get over the finish line and win the next campaign.
So let me ask you about that campaign in particular, when you talk about building or growing the number. Is that the strategy, to grow the number, or will it be to count on other factors, like, for example, a collapse in Liberal support or a resurgence of NDP support, to be able to get you over the finish line?
So never like to lay out strategy, but I don't think this is really telling too many tales out of school. It's not a great plan to try to count on your opponents failing and hoping that the NDP come back and do this or do that. We have to look at the coalition that Pierre Poilievre has built, that the Conservative Party has built, and that's there, and we have to look at how to build that higher. I do think no one really knows if we're now in this two-party system that sort of is there. Will it return to back a little bit more, normal in the next campaign? I think it's still too early to tell. So from my vantage point, for sure, you need to try to build that coalition and expand it further.
So do you have a gut feeling about whether the two-party system is here to stay, at least for the next election? Like, do you think the NDP will have a resurgence?
I can't guess what that's going to. First of all, I don't know who their leader is going to be. I don't know what issues they're going to choose to go on. So for me, I'll focus on what we're going to do. We're going to continue to try to build that coalition. We're going to be talking about issues, I mean, no surprise, of affordability, housing, crime, those things that already have that strong base of support that are there. And, some of the things that we hear about, how we can, communicate a little bit differently and so on, and people might be more open to our message if things were just slightly different and so on. We're open to all that as well.
So let me ask you about that from a more theoretical perspective in a way, because I left the convention, particularly listening to the speech, kind of arriving at the thesis that there was a doubling down over the central message of the last election. That line in the speech about, we've listened and we're not going to abandon our principles. Mm-hmm. Am I accurate in interpreting that means, the central message, the central deliverer of the message in Pierre Poilievre will remain the same, but there will be some tinkering around the edges to address, getting over the hump? Is that the right interpretation from where you sit?
I think I guess I'm going to agree with a chunk of that. That's fair to say that, yes, abandoning your values very rarely pays off in politics. And if we're talking about values of making sure young Canadians can afford homes and that there's less food bank usage and that things are more affordable and that crime starts to drop, I don't think us pivoting away from that helps anybody but our opponents, frankly, in the upcoming election. But are there some things that we can do that build onto that and speak to, different age cohorts and different demographics? If there's some things that they want to see from us, and tone seems to be one, and that's fine. I'm very happy to show more facets of our leader. I do think he's a person with a great sense of humor and has a great family, and he's a family person. And so I just think if that's what certain people want to see to make themselves more comfortable, then sorry about that. Okay. Then we're certainly happy to do that.
When you talk about tone, I'll ask you in sort of a crass way, what the punditry class is and you've seen the numbers. I'm sure you look at different polls where Mr. Poilievre's own personal popularity has gone down since the election in some instances, certainly since 2022, while Mr. Carney's, the Prime Minister, has gone up. Does Mr. Poilievre, in your view, need to be more likable?
So a few things. I mean, I think in general, politicians generally have a likability challenge, but I will say opposition leaders have a special challenge because their job is to get up every day and hold the government to account, and that by its very nature, has a contrast to it, and it's sort of something that, can look a bit more negative. So I've seen that, across the country when people see, and we saw that recently in Newfoundland and Labrador, the campaign I worked on, when Tony Wakeham was the opposition leader for quite a while, and it was, oh, why is he so negative? I mean, that's not his personality, but that was the job he has to play. And so in this situation, I do think, again, if we can show other facets of Mr. Poilievre, when he connects with people, it's quite powerful. And he does have a sincere concern. And I think that's, again, back to that authenticity point. I mean, he is a fighter. He's fighting on these important issues for Canadians. And I don't think us moving away from that is going to help us.
Are you concerned about, or maybe I'll put it more bluntly, do the Conservatives want an election?
Well, right now, it's not going to be up to us. We'll be ready for one. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. I mean,
it could be at some point, right? In a minority government, it could be up to the opposition parties if they decide. But at this, I'm talking from a strategic point of view. I know other stuff will happen in Parliament, but if it were up to you, would you be going to the polls now or later, given what the I mean,
generally, less than a year after an election, that's not really a time to go have another election unless there's things that, require that to do. I think the Liberals right now, that looks appealing to them for a whole bunch of reasons, and I'm happy to expand on that, but I'll stick with your question. So for us, we're happy to work in Parliament and get some things done and get results for Canadians and help the government actually advance their agenda and move from rhetoric to results, as has been said, and that's going to be our focus. But if it happens and an election is forced, we'll be ready. Are
you worried that they get a majority through floor crossers? Are you worried? And particularly, I'll ask against sort of the context of this weekend, where there was that 12.6%. That guy who stopped me at the airport said, I know it's a term that everyone hates to use, but he's a red Tory. And he did, that's what Chris D'Entremont said too. Are you worried about more now that there is this sort of solidification of message?
So I'd like to say to the Red Tories across the country that we want to work with the entire coalition, right, the whole Conservative family. I think for us to win this next election, we need to be working together. We need to have those conservative values, those small c conservative values that unite us as a party, and we need to be together as one movement. I can't predict what people are going to do and what motivates them. I mean, certainly, we've been around politics enough to see the crass side of it. The Liberals are one. I mean, I guess we're looking at the retirements that are happening. I guess technically it's a little bit further away, but overall, one seat away from the magic number that they're seeking. That is a ground that is ripe for a bidding war to start for any, to go over and look for people in other parties to say, hey, while I can't make a real promise, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, boy, it would sure be great to have you there, and we think you could play a real part on our team. Now, whether they're saying that with actual meaning behind it or just something to lure someone over, I can't control any of that, and ultimately that's going to be up to individuals and their conscience and what they decide to do. So, but we're going to be looking to kind of work with the whole Conservative movement to win this next election. And, I'll leave it to the Liberals to decide what they're going to do in terms of trying to lure people and play games like that.
One final question outside of the domestic, sort of outside of that same domestic realm. Why wasn't Trump's name used in the speech? And what should it tell us, if anything, about the campaign's approach or the party's approach right now to that issue?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, I don't think Trump's name was used in the Davos speech at all.
Which we pointed out frequently,
and that's fair. So, I mean, I don't remember there being a whole lot of debate about, should he or should he not have and so on. So, that's fine. We'll get that question. From my perspective, what the leader was talking about was our overall approach to international affairs and how we will stand up on the world stage for Canada. We're proud Canadians. We're proud to stand up for our country and against any, other force and, that's coming against us. And so, that was a broader point that was made, and I think we're ready to be serious about that for sure.
Is there any hesitation on your party's part to go full force into that issue, either because it seems to be a winning one, if you look at public opinion polls for the Liberals, or because there is a section of your base that doesn't not like Trump?
So two parts to that. I mean, first thing is, no, we're not hesitant to do that. I mean, the way to win an election is to stand up for the country. So if someone is coming against our country, we need to push back against them, and that's just, bottom line. And I forget what the second point I was going to make was. So there we go.
Last question for you, and then you're free, I promise. It was just about whether, I remember listening to the former campaign manager, Jenny Byrne, on a podcast in which she said, there is some crossover, right? And certainly we've seen public opinion polls to that fact. And I'm wondering if there will be any hesitance to dive into that issue for fear of alienating, and other Canadians will criticize this, but for fear of alienating Conservative supporters who don't not like Trump.
Right, and Jenny makes a great point there, and I'll just agree with her on that, is that, a lot within our party, I mean, the reason that the positioning or the posturing of the Liberals was not received well by some in our party is that it's sort of seen as just performance pieces, right? And so for us, I think within the Conservative movement overall, we do strongly value a good relationship with the United States. It's just very difficult with this president to have that right now. So there is an acknowledgement or recognition that, ultimately, deals tend to come out of good conversations and diplomatic approaches and actually people working together. This administration in Washington is making it very, very difficult to do that. But for us, we just want to see results as Conservatives. And so that's why it's not, the performance side of it is not something we're really looking to do. We want to get those results. And so that's why we're not as keen, I think, to kind of adopt that same posture, but still to stand up for Canada.
It's not about alienating people who might like Trump, though.
The best way to win this election is to stand up for Canada. Well,
that's a note to leave it on then. Mr. Outhouse, a pleasure as always. I appreciate making the time. Thank you. Steve Outhouse is the Conservative Party's campaign manager. I want to turn to some other news developing here on Parliament Hill, and actually Mr. Outhouse referenced it. Liberal MP and former Cabinet Minister Bill Blair has resigned his seat. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced he intends to appoint Blair as High Commissioner in the United Kingdom. In a news release, the Prime Minister's office says Blair's appointment will be effective this spring. His departure will trigger a by-election in the riding of Scarborough Southwest. And speaking of by-elections, this past weekend, the Liberals announced family physician Dr. Danielle Martin will be their candidate for the University Rosedale by-election, a riding held by Chrystia Freeland, until she stepped down earlier this month. Coming up tonight on Power Play, we have been talking about the fact that Pierre Poilievre won his leadership review. He's also announced that he's asking for a meeting with the Prime Minister, and that meeting will occur as soon as this week. Our front bench is standing by to talk about all of that. Brian Gallant, Lisa Ray, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. There they are. They're back with me in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
We're a country in crisis. That's why about a week ago I wrote the Prime Minister offering to fast-track policies for an affordable, safe, self-reliant Canada. I've not heard back, so I'm seeking an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister to discuss how Parliament can quickly reverse the food price crisis, the crime crisis, and the dependency crisis Liberals have caused. I'll bring practical solutions and an openness to hear other ideas and work together to fast-track results.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there is saying he's seeking an urgent meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney to discuss affordability, crime, and other issues, as he highlighted. The Prime Minister's office has just sent us a note saying that the Prime Minister is looking forward to meeting with opposition party leaders to discuss their priorities as this new sitting progresses. All of that comes as MPs unanimously approve a Conservative motion to fast-track a Liberal bill through the House by Wednesday. That legislation, Bill C-19, seeks to enact what's called the new Canada and Groceries and Essentials benefit, which would increase the existing GST rebate. It's a plan the Parliamentary Budget Officer said today will cost Ottawa an estimated $12.4 billion over 5 years. The leader of that party, the Conservatives, Mr. Poilievre, has called it a Band-Aid solution, but as you heard there, his party will now kind of usher it through the House of Commons at an expedited pace. Here's Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne on the new spirit of collaboration.
I'd like to believe it, but maybe I've been here too long to know that folks say things, but what matters to Canadians is the action they're going to take. On my side, I can tell you, in caucus, no. I'm willing, and I'm saying that on live television, I'm willing to appear at committee this afternoon if they so want.
Here to unpack the new year, new vibes is our front bench. Former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant is with us. He's now the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Vashti.
Good to see you. Lisa, I'll start with you on this one. Very interesting. We're hearing that meeting is going to take place this week. It was just confirmed by both the Prime Minister's office and by Mr. Poilievre. What do you make of this, not just talk of collaboration, but distinct effort to actually make that materialize on the Conservatives' part?
I think that one thing I know to be true is that when Canadians are in a crisis, and I think we are in an affordability crisis, I think that's very concerning. What they want to see from their elected officials is cooperation. We saw that during COVID. They very much appreciate it when different orders of government work with one another. And I dare say that the same would apply with respect to opposition and government, especially in this case, where it's about giving relief to Canadians who probably need a break in terms of how much of their groceries and their gas and everything else is costing. Now, the Conservatives are still going to tie it back and say, look, we're in this problem because of the way that you guys have managed the economy for the last 10 years. But they're not going to stand in the way of policies that are going to help alleviate some of the pressure. So it's a little bit different from the past. They're still going to try to ascribe some kind of blame, but at the same time, they're not going to stand in the way and be an obstacle or be claimed to be an obstacle for an actual relief.
So it's interesting because we'll talk about sort of the speech, Tom, from Mr. Poilievre earlier. But as I put to Mr. Outhouse, I left that speech with the impression that there was a real doubling down on the approach taken in the last election. The video today, the meeting, the efforts in the House of Commons leave me with actually a bit of a different impression, which is that this is everyone hates the word pivot, but this is a pivot from, in a certain way by Mr. Poilievre. This effort to be more collaborative, borne out by actual actions, is not the same as what we would have seen necessarily 6 months ago.
Exactly, but I also think that it's a question of context. Mr. Poilievre wasn't going to change his tune or his tone when talking to the people who were about to decide his fate as leader of the party. He was going to be himself, and he assumed that wholly in that speech. He says, people want us to change. We're not going to change. We're right. And they eventually always realize that we're always right. So that was for his home base. Now he's trying to do what everybody understands that he's got to do if he ever wants to have a chance of becoming Prime Minister of Canada. He's got to talk to more people, not just his hardcore base. So I loved your interview with Mr. Outhouse. I had a chance to see most of it before, and first of all, I found him very refreshing, super articulate, very engaged and engaging, and I thought that his messages were super clear. So if that's the way that they're going to go, use the rule book of the House of Commons to best effect, try to get stuff brought forward, even though it's going to be a little bit like the NDP. Well, they didn't get much credit for the dental plan, the Liberals did, but people kind of remember it was the NDP. So, he's bringing forward the checks a little bit faster, which means that they don't necessarily coincide with perhaps an earlier election. Maybe they'll have to promise a second check if they get reelected. But at the same time, I think that what Poilievre is showing is that he's on the right track. He's talking to people. He talks about affordability all the time. It was a great move on the part of the Conservatives, and I think it has to be acknowledged as such.
So what about Brian, your anticipation as to how, or the stakes for the Liberals navigating that? Because to, Minister Champagne's point, they're not necessarily accustomed to it. At the same time, this has to have a little bit of strategizing around a possible election. I don't think the Conservatives want to be seen as forcing one. I think the Liberals, don't want to be seen that way, but might be pushed into that kind of position as well. What is your take on how the government has to navigate this newfound promise of collaboration?
Let me start off by saying I agree with Tom's analysis, but I want to add one little difference, which goes a little bit to your question. I think for Poilievre, what this does is provide a pretty strong talking point where, to your point, Vashi, he looking to do a bit of a pivot. He can, in the future, say, look, I've helped you on some things that we agreed on. We fast-tracked this. It's going to be something that he can use, I believe, to sort of soften his image. And what Outhouse was saying, basically try to show a little bit maybe who he is more, or what people want him to be more of, to try to be a little more appealing to a larger group in some certain ridings and key areas. So to me, it's not so much about taking credit about the substance of the GST initiative. It's more about that talking point. And then at the same time, I think for the Liberals, this is interesting because it's a bit almost on defense for them too. It's a bit of a talking point for them too. Look, we discussed last week. I mean, there's substantive reasons why this policy will help a lot of people, to Lisa's point, on the issues facing people with affordability. But at the same time, from a purely political point of view, this allows the Liberals to say, look, we're focused on the economy, we're focused on trade, we're focused on the trading relationship with the US and others and all that good stuff. But also we did do some stuff on affordability, such as, and so it's a really interesting file or issue, if you will, because it's sort of serving as a talking point, almost on defense for both. And yeah, to your point, I think the Liberals of the last 10 years will find it very weird to try to collaborate. They're going to find that, I think, probably very different from what they've been used to. But I'm not sure for Prime Minister Carney. Look, he came out right after the election, said we'll call a by-election right away if there's one, and Poilievre wants to run in it. So I think he certainly, whether that's in his DNA or his approach, he certainly wants to not try to get into that stuff. So I think he'll be able to handle it and handle it quite well.
Well, I think even from maybe even a more pragmatic perspective, whereas in the last 10 years, the natural dancing partner, Benzie, was the NDP because there was so much policy alignment between the two parties. That policy alignment in many cases now exists much more so with the Conservatives than it does with any other party.
And that's a great point, Vashti, and that's certainly true. I mean, it's Stephen Harper week on Parliament Hill this week. They're going to hang the portrait of the former prime minister, and we know that from the reporting from my colleague Tana McCharles that Mr. Harper and Mark Carney speak quite often. And we know that Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney, or Mr. Harper, speak quite often. Remember, Mr. Harper wanted Mr. Carney to be his finance minister after he had made him Bank of Canada governor way back when. So we're in an interesting time where Mark Carney really does appeal to progressive conservatives, what I would call progressive conservatives, red Tories. Not that Mr. Harper's necessarily a red Tory, but certainly here in Ontario, Premier Doug Ford is, and Doug Ford is the closest thing that Mark Carney has to a bromance partner among the premiers. So I think Carney is more comfortable in that space. And plus, there's only 7 NDP MPs right now. So it's not like I mean, I guess they get you over the top in a majority, but do you want to have those 7 MPs being the tail that wags a dog, or do you want a lot of moderate conservative MPs from Ontario, from the West, from Quebec? I mean, that's a really attractive coalition for Mr. Carney. It's not a real coalition, but it's certainly one that can survive. And one other thing, Vashti, that I took out of your interview with Steve Outhouse, who exudes reasonableness, frankly. I think that it sounds to me like the Tories do not want an election. Steve said to you, look, it hasn't even been a year yet. And I think he's right. I don't think Canadians necessarily want an election. I think Mark Carney might want an election because the polls are looking good for him. But it's always risky to go to the polls. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I was talking to some Liberal MPs this weekend who were saying that they have more of a concern now than they would have a few months ago, Lisa, about being punished by the voters on that. Do you think this promise or this spirit of collaboration, A, lasts, and B, do you think could it stave off an election?
Wow. Can it last? Yes. Because I think as much as it would be nice to get to an election sooner than later, I think the reality is that what Benzie said, the Canadian public do not want to have an election. And I actually think it was good policy or good practice that this idea was floated earlier on so that you could take a litmus test as to how Canadians feel about it. And it wasn't good. There's just not an appetite for that right now. They want people to work. So the Conservatives are going to work. So when the Conservatives or the NDP or wherever find themselves having to support the government on some kind of legislation in the spring, at least they started a track record in terms of cooperation.
Okay, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. We've got a lot to talk about when it comes to that result that Pierre Poilievre got with his leadership vote, his leadership review, as well as his speech to delegates there. We're going to talk about that with the front bench after a short break. Back in a moment.
You told us to ignore the voices who keep telling us to abandon our conservative principles. We will remain true to our principles. Hope. That's really the theme of this convention. And that thing that you call meaning could be for you a home, a career, a family, a business. Seeing your autistic daughter speak for the first time is the thing. It's the thing. The unsung heroes who built and protect this country, who have it infinitely harder than I do, they never give up, so I have no right to give up.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre there vowing that his party will remain true to conservative values. Poilievre passed the biggest test of his leadership this past weekend. Following last year's election loss, the Conservative leader faced a review on whether he should remain at the helm of the party. At his party's national convention, he delivered a nearly 50-minute campaign-style speech. More than 2,500 ballots were cast, representing 95% of eligible delegates attending the event. The results were overwhelmingly in favor of Poilievre, with the leader receiving 87.4% of the vote. So what message does Poilievre's decisive victory send, and what comes next for both him and the party? Our front bench is back to talk about that. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Tom, I'll start with you. What do you read into the number? What do you take away from the weekend?
Back when I was in the Quebec Liberal Party as a member of the National Assembly, Daniel Johnson had been premier. He was our leader. After an election that he had lost, he had a leadership review, got a number in the mid-80s. He's a bright guy, very strong. And we realized one thing, that he was going to have a heck of a hard time connecting with people and couldn't win an election. It was a very rough situation. He was replaced by Jean Charest, who went on later to win several elections for the Quebec Liberals. I thought of that when I saw that number in the mid-80s for Poilievre. What could be better? But as you correctly say, Vashti, those are the people in that room in Calgary. Yeah. It's not even the wider conservative body across Canada, many of whom in Ontario were having their own convention. So let's not get ahead of ourselves with what that number means with regard to the whole country. I've spoken to any number of people who are in that party, and especially people who have been in caucus. And they remember the Pierre Poilievre, who was very rough on them when he was 28% ahead in the polls. He decided who could speak, what they could say, and good luck to you if you went outside those rules. Caucus is essential to the leadership, and I think that Mr. Poilievre has started to figure that out. But the wider Canadian voting public, you have to look at the numbers that come out constantly. The Conservatives and the Liberals are within a few points. The Libs are a few points ahead, but I mean, that's all margin of error stuff. The real issue is, who are people going to see as their prime minister? Right now, that's Mark Carney. And he might not want to talk about Trump because he didn't want to concede that territory at his speech in Calgary, but that's what people are thinking of. Is he capable of handling these big international issues, or is he going to keep talking to us about the same stuff he's been talking about through the last election and all throughout that speech? It was a warmer speech, and good on us for showing that particular very human clip on a personal family level. But beyond that, the question is, what does the wider Canadian voting public think? And I think that they realize what comes out in those polls, that Mr. Poilievre is having trouble connecting with Canadian voters who don't see him as the person who could lead the country. I don't want to be tough saying that, but I do think that that's the case reflected in those polls.
I do have the sense from the interview with Mr. Outhouse, Lisa, that there wasn't like a lot of disagreement with that assessment. Like, we agree, we reinforced this weekend the set of policies that we thought worked in the last election, we think matters at this moment in time to Canadians, but there is a tone issue. And even when I pushed a little bit and said, like, would you agree with the assessment from public opinion polls that there's a likability issue, that Mr. Poilievre has a likability problem, he didn't really say that wasn't the case, and he pointed to a number of sort of instances in which other parts, other aspects of his personality, he said, would be on display. What do you make of that?
So where I've landed on all this is that Pierre fought the last election by pointing to Justin Trudeau and tearing down the leader. What he's going to have to do this time, though, is to connect with Canadians and ask them, are they really better off than they were before? And then put out a plan so how he will make it better for them. And I think that's what he started to do in the speech. He was a little bit lighter in terms of going after Mr. Carney. He really talked about how the Liberals have caused you to be in the place that you're in right now as you reflect upon your own life. I'd also say this, Vashti, that Donald Trump isn't going to be around forever. He's not going to necessarily be here next year with this kind of turmoil, meaning that we may have a NAFTA deal, we may have a CUSMA deal at the end of the summer, and all of this kind of flattens out and straightens away. And at that point in time, Canadians will start to look around and going, okay, well, we're not worried about the geopolitical stuff much anymore. Who understands me, my troubles, my problems, and who has the best plan for getting us out of the situation we're in? And that's when I think Pierre can compete one-on-one.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, Brian, a whole bunch of things that could happen, like Trump fades from the ecosystem, and as I discussed with Mr. Outhouse, the NDP resurges, the Liberals really fumble. Mr. Outhouse was pretty specific, though, that like hoping for that stuff would not be a strategy, that they intend to try and grow the share of votes that they got from the last election. Do you sense there, like from what you listened to, what Mr. Outhouse said, like there is a plan to do that, or what would you think would be the advisable plan to do so? Like, is it possible?
Well, I think we talked about in the first segment with the idea that maybe there's going to be a bit of a pivot, a softer tone, and they realize that they can't just be the opposition. Outhouse talked about that as well, which we've talked about numerous times. We have a few people that have served in that position of leader of the opposition, and you have this weird on this call, and we have this weird dynamic that I think Tom and I can speak to, where you're trying to ensure that you keep the government to account, but also you're auditioning for another job, right? You're trying to also communicate why people should put their trust in you. So it is actually quite difficult. That resonated with me when Outhouse mentioned that in his interview. I think, to build on Lisa's point, the trouble started a long time ago, where I think the missed opportunity for the Conservatives was that Poilievre had really brought Trudeau and his government to a halt in terms of public opinion. I mean, it was just, they did such a great job. He did specifically such a good job as leader of the opposition, but he kept at it. And he had a moment, I think, when he was so ahead in the polls where people were pretty much decided on Trudeau's fate, that he could have started to use his newfound position and start to talk about who he is and what he wants to do. And I think that was a missed opportunity for the last election for him. Now, you got to learn from your mistakes. So to your question, what could they maybe do? I mean, if I were them, would entertain kind of what they seem to be doing the last 24, 48 hours. Basically try to say, okay, we've gotten past the leadership review, to Tom's point. We spoke to our base. We've locked that in. Now we really got to start to soften things, let people know what he's about, what drives him, what kind of person he is. And if they do that, then I think they have a better shot. But that was my main advice was at a time when Trudeau people had decided this is tougher, because that's not the case with Carney. So they are in a trickier spot now, but the advice kind of holds, if you will. They really have to get people to know him and basically like him.
I wonder if it ends up materializing at all in something we used to talk about a long time ago when it was Trudeau versus Poilievre, Benzie, which was like they were the attack dogs at each other, right? They kept getting advice to delegate that to other people so that they could kind of position themselves differently. But both of them at the time couldn't help it. And to Lisa's point, that sort of continued during the election, even when the leadership changed from Justin Trudeau to Mark Carney. I denote like a little less of that, certainly, now. But maybe, that ends up being, as I said, one way that this materializes. Maybe it isn't all about Poilievre versus Carney. And Andrew Scheer goes after the Prime Minister and Mr. Poilievre does something different. I don't know if he'd be willing to give that up, though.
Yeah, I mean, he clearly relishes the role, but what's the old adage that if you look like you're auditioning for opposition leader, you're going to be the opposition leader. And I think he was too negative. Bashi, you and I have talked about this offline. I'm surprised that they bring out Andrew Scheer as often as they do, because he's a failed former leader. It's not like the Carney Liberals are trotting out Justin Trudeau to sell their policies because he's another failed former leader. You just someone you want to put in your past. If I were Mr. Poilievre, I would be trotting out some of the many talented MPs he's got on his front benches and having them carry a lot of the load, and also the fresher faces. I think he needs to be casting things forward more rather than just looking like a nattering nabob of negativism, as William Safire would have said. But I think he should be very happy. 87.4% is a fantastic result. The North Koreans are jealous, for heaven's sake. So he should be really. And now what he has to do now is batten down the hatches and hope that there isn't another floor crosser in the next week or two. Although maybe he wants 1 or 2 to go so that at least he doesn't have to have an election right away. Because as I said earlier, I don't think they want one. And if I were them, I wouldn't want one right now. Because Lisa's right. Donald Trump will be gone eventually. Trump, as long as Trump is around, it's going to be very, very hard for Poilievre to win an election in this country. We know this. On Saturday night, I was at a speech with 1,000 conservatives here in Ontario, where Doug Ford spent a lot of time talking about how bad Donald Trump was. And it helps Mr. Ford. He got lots of applause for that. I don't blame Poilievre for not mentioning Trump by name in that room, because a good number of the conservative base, the federal conservative base, they are MAGA folks. They like Mr. Trump. Not 2/3, but certainly close to 1/3. At least that's what Nick Cavalis, the conservative pollster, said on David Hurley's podcast last week, that roughly 1/3 of their 30% solid conservative base thinks Trump does a good job. So they got to be it's a very difficult line for Mr. Poilievre to ride.
Yeah, nobody said it's easy, I guess, leading a party. Thanks, guys, as all of you would know much better than me, well, except for Benzie. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Coming up after a quick break, we're going to go live to where Stephen Harper and Jean Chrétien, 2 former prime ministers, just sat down for a fireside discussion. This week marks the 20th anniversary of when Stephen Harper became prime minister, and there's a whole series of events commemorating that here on Parliament Hill during the week. We'll take a quick break and go live to Mike LeCouture, who's got the latest from that conversation.
Now, some people look at Canada and would like to take it over from us. But we stand on guard, don't worry.
Their long-run threats to the North were actually quite serious, I think. I think I've been borne out in that regard. I didn't anticipate them being our southern neighbor. The one thing about this world, whether we like it or not, we are living in an age of nationalism everywhere, revived nationalism. And there is no reason why this country should not be as nationalistic as anyone else. Look, I love the United States, but I'm not an American. I think our country's different, worth preserving. You know, I don't want to suggest that, you know, we should go around kind of accepting unacceptable costs. But the fact of the matter is that the country's worth preserving, that I think there are costs that are going to have to be paid.
2 of Canada's former prime ministers there weighing in on Canadian unity and this country's place in the world as we talk about the future of Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party. This week is certainly a reminder of the past. Friday will mark exactly 20 years since Stephen Harper was sworn in as prime minister, beginning almost a decade of Conservative rule in Canada. Today kicks off about a week's worth of events in Ottawa to commemorate the anniversary, including a medal ceremony, portrait unveiling, and gala. Mike LeCouture was at that fireside chat between Prime Ministers Harper and Chrétien. He joins us live from the location there, the Royal Geographic Society. Hey, Mike, what stood out to you in that conversation? Kind of neat just to see them together like that.
Yeah, it was interesting because you have 2 political foes in the past anyways, who are certainly united on the stage with one common message. And they were saying essentially that, look, we have come together in the past, and this now is a message for politicians today to collaborate, but also to make sure that they unite in defense of Canada right now. It was interesting in how Stephen Harper raised in that fireside chat how on the Clarity Act, which was something that was championed by Jean Chrétien's Liberals following the 1995 referendum, that it was Harper who said that, look, I was the one who submitted one of the first drafts of the Clarity Act to Parliament, and they said how much they worked together on that. Chrétien noting that that is something that didn't get a lot of attention at the time, but certainly an example of both sides of the aisle making sure that they're working together in preservation of this country, and saying that that is what we need to do now. And certainly, as you heard in that clip from former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, is saying that when he came into office in 2006, 20 years ago, that he thought that there would be an attack on Canadian sovereignty, especially in the Arctic, and that is why he took such a keen interest in it. But he thought that that would be, he didn't think at the time that it would be coming from our neighbor to the south. So interesting how they really didn't try and address news of the day, Vashi, but certainly there were some dancing around it and certainly some hints and suggestions, as these 2 politicians do at times.
Yeah, I think we've got some additional clips from what they said. I'm going to play them and get some more insight from you.
The one thing about this world, whether we like it or not, we are living in an age of nationalism everywhere, revived nationalism. And there is no reason why this country should not be as nationalistic as anyone else. We have a lot to be proud of. It's a tremendous country. I think just about any person and almost anywhere in the world would love to be here, to have the circumstances of our country.
We're living a very important time in the world. It's a big shift. It is probably what I would call the beginning of the end of the American empire. And it has to come. All the empires change.
Interesting, Mike, there was a time, and both you and I will remember, when they really didn't get along, and now they are on the same page. Not get along, they just weren't on the same page, and now they are singing from a similar playbook.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Jean Chretien made a bit of a joke about it, saying, look, we're not political enemies. And he said that they just weren't too close at the time because Stephen Harper was a little too afraid of getting the Shawinigan handshake, which, of course, that reference to when he choked a protester on Flag Day on Parliament Hill. And so he actually did reach over to Stephen Harper as well, not quite going from the former Prime Minister's neck, but certainly making a bit of a joke of it, but certainly saying that, look, just because we don't agree politically on certain things, this country, to the point of those clips were making, that this country is worth saving. And Jean Chretien made a comment as well, saying that in his home province of Quebec, that the demand and the actual desire for a referendum on sovereignty has never been lower, despite the Parti Québécois rising in the polls right now. And then he kind of made a bit of a jab, and he said, but what's going on in Alberta over there? And then he made reference to the number of signatures on a petition. And he actually said to Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister, he said, were there any Tories that signed that petition? And Harper sort of under his breath said, I'm told that there were none. So still a couple of friendly jabs, Vashi, but certainly the overarching message was that Canadians can come together, and they do need to come together, especially at this time.
Thanks, Mike. Our senior political correspondent, Mike LeCouture. We're back in just a moment. We were talking a little bit earlier about events in Ottawa to commemorate the 20th anniversary of when Stephen Harper became Prime Minister. Tomorrow, Stephen Harper's portrait will be unveiled alongside Prime Minister Mark Carney in the House of Commons. We'll certainly be covering all that right here on CTV News Channel. I will leave Power Play there. Thanks so much for watching tonight. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.